Okay, Angular Orange here with a tutorial on the Flexlayout module. The Flexlayout module is a component engine that provides a sophisticated layout API using Flexbox CSS and media query. It has component layout features via template directives, and in this particular tutorial we're going to talk only about the template directives. There's also media query observables. I love this feature. This is when you resize the browser, it fires events, and you're subscribing to these events, and you could pretty much, upon those events, you could determine that you're on an iPad Pro or you're on an iPhone, or you could determine the size of your device, and you could dynamically change your content. And then there's injected DOM Flex 2016 CSS Styles. And so basically what the Flex module does is it intelligently automates the process of applying appropriate Flexbox CSS to browser view hierarchies. This automation also addresses many of the complexities and workarounds encountered with the traditional manual CSS-only application of Flexbox CSS. Now, I previously wrote AngularOrange.io using Flexbox and Material Design, and I found it to be very interesting how simple it was to change styles and have your application display, let's say, material design cards in different in a container within different devices. But the Flex Layout module is a high level approach. It gives you those directives within your template to do what you need to do. So there's the static capabilities, there's responsive capabilities, and there's also these media query observables, which are really interesting. Okay, so I say note, Flexbox, it's a new layout module in CSS3, or let's say it was something in CSS3 that ensures that the elements behave predictably when the page layout must accommodate the different screen sizes and different display devices. And the Flex Layout module is sort of providing the Angular twist on that, so you don't have to deal with the CSS styles if you don't want to, and you could just use the directives to do what you need to do. Okay, so it's used for creating Flexbox-based page layouts with a set of directives available to use in your templates. And here's the things I was just mentioning. There's no external CSS styling needed. It's written in pure TypeScript. It provides a way to specify different directives at different breakpoints to create responsive layouts. It stands on its own and can be used with material design. The implementation, however, requires 4.1 or higher, and it's independent of material design too. Okay, so you'll notice some of this stuff I take from the standard documentation. I don't want to redo these particular pictures. I don't even use Photoshop anymore. But just the terminology, you've got this concept of a container. Let's suppose it's a div tag or something like that. And inside of it you have these items, and let's suppose we call them flex items. And basically you've got this main axis that goes across horizontally. So you could talk about a main start and a main end, and then you also have this cross axis, and you could talk about the cross start on the top to the cross end on the bottom. And of course the whole yellow thing is the flex container. Now you decide what's going to be a flex container. I say I'm going to have an outer div tag. It's going to be my flex container, and inside that I might have some div tags which are flex items. Okay, so each flex item is got a main size and a cross size. And the idea behind the flex layout is to be able to resize your let's say resize your browser or view this view on different devices, and have the size of the viewport change. And based on that, you're going to define how these flex items float or are maintained inside the container. Okay, so to install it, you just do an npm install Angular Flex Layout. I think that's a -- save -dev. And then if you look at the version of what you're doing, look at the version of your project, let's say, you'll see that you're using the latest and greatest Angular CLI 1.5. You're using the proper node, using Angular 5 with all the modules, and then you'll also notice that the Flex Layout is appearing in your list of modules that you're using. And then also you see your TypeScript version, which is 2.4. Now, what I do right now, I have WebStorm installed, and I have the latest. I install at Angular /CLI at latest, and I always have globally the global version, the highest version of Angular that's available. And so that's what I did here. I actually went in and I installed the latest, and then I went and created a project, and then I CD'd into the project at an ng-v, and I see what I have. And sorry, this is a little bit misleading. I'm really on Windows, and I'm really inside my project view. Let's say I do this command. I'm in WebStorm, my WebStorm project directory, and I CD into my project. After I create a new project using Angular CLI within WebStorm, I actually do an ng-v, and I make sure that my version is proper. Okay, so now how do I use this? I go into my app.module and I import the FlexLayoutModule, and then I import it. My app module is an exported class, which is decorated by the ng-module tag, and I have to make sure that my FlexLayoutModule is listed in the imports. And that's really it. Once you do that, you could pretty much build your component templates using it. Okay, I have an app component also, and as you can see, there's no dependency on the Flex Layout there, but I do go into my app component class, and I define some things. In particular, I define is mobile and is invisible on desktop. I return true, and what I do in the responsive sense is when I'm looking at a mobile device. This function is typically executed and monitored. So if it's not a mobile device, then this returns false, and I use that function for different things. And basically, if it is a mobile, then basically what I'll do is I'll lay out vertically using a column-oriented layout. And then if I open up my window and I see that and I go to a desktop view, I might return is this invisible on desktop, and I might return that. I might use that true value to actually hide something. So there's different functions you can put in your component, and based on the responsiveness within the Flex Layout module directives, you can pretty much hide things or show things or reorient things. Okay, so here's a simple example of how you can use it. So what I do is I basically define a container. This outer container puts some spaces around my let's say my row of div tags, which are colored blue, let's say, and basically what I do is I have this container which does the flex, acts as my flex container. So in my style here, this is flex, defined as a flex container, and then in my FlexLayout.xs I say, well, if you're on a mobile device, orient this vertically as a column, else it's going to be row oriented, because in my container style sheet, this particular class says display this as a flex row, and then what I also do is I override that style and I say, okay, if on the mobile device, display it as a column. And then over here, I could put an offset of an item as 20%, and the size of all these items might shrink uniformly, which is just an example to show you something. And then I define a flex order here, which takes this item 2 and puts it as the third item. If you want to do that, I'm just giving you some examples of the particular directives. And then this one here, I do a FX hide for large displays. What I do is I'll hide it if this thing returns true, and on so on large desktops, what I'll do is I will invoke this function, and this will return true, and therefore fx hide will be true. You could hard code it true here if you really want to. So this is just an example. So basically what I started with, and I'll show you this interactively with the sample code. What I started with was this item, was with this layout here, where I had the outer div tag is colored, the background is colored green, and then I had the div tag with some flex items in it, and I labeled them item 1, item 2, and item 3. And these blue things are div tags colored with a background blue, and they are in a div container, which is not the green one. It's this one. Okay, so then I start applying. I just wanted to show you some examples of what you're trying to do visually with the Flex layout module. You can basically put the offset in there if you wanted to. So that's my 20% offset, I think, and then I resized the first item. And what happened is that doesn't look the way I want it to. It's because something else in my styles is interfering with that. And if I go through, if I look at the debugger and figure out which style's overriding it, I would find out which one it was. And I did find out, and I did fix it. But then I decided to put it back the way it was, because I'm using the styles in other components. So which is not necessarily a good practice in my book. But the bottom line is, the bottom line is you can resize the elements and do whatever you want with them if you get your style, if you get your directives right, and you minimize the styles you have in your style sheet. I recommend that. Okay, and then what I did was I reordered item 2. I put it as the third item, and I'm showing you that. I did resize the browser so that it goes into mobile mode, and in that case I'm looking at a small display, which is a pixel length less than 600 pixels, whatever, and I just decide to have the layout of the items to be column oriented. Now, another thing I'm going to point out here is that the different device sizes are kind of built in, and I do show that in our course. We do have a Flex Layout module course, which is going to go through all the features and stuff. But to make a long story short, I'm just trying to use 3 or 4 sets of device sizes here, but you use XS for the mobile. You've got the medium MD, you got the large LG, and there's others you could use, just like what you would find in Bootstrap. But so the APIs of the Flex Layout module, there's an HTML API which is declarative in the template. We saw a little example of that. And there's also some, and we're going to talk about just a static API here, and maybe throw in a little bit of this, but there's a responsive API which is pretty extensive too, and it's based on the breakpoints. And so when you look at, what you're first going to do is you're going to look at the static API, you're going to look at the out-of-the-box responsive API. which means you could hide and show elements based on device sizes and do all the stuff. And you could use the declarative directives in templates. And those are the features you want to focus on initially. But the responsive API goes a little bit deeper. Also, with this JavaScript API, there's features here which are very intriguing. One of them I've used right away, which I thought was very simple, but it was the observable media, which gets injected into your constructor, and as your browser devices, your users start using different devices, or let's say if your browser is resized and everything, you get these events. You could tell it's a mobile device. You could tell if it's an iPad, or you could tell if it's a desktop, and based on that, you could change your content. And the breakpoints are very interesting as well. But I would stay away from these initially. Some of the stuff is hard to get working. But just to mention the breakpoints, you can override your breakpoints. Like you could say, well, on the mobile device, when you go to print, don't show these elements, just show the content that you want to print. And so you do have to do a fair amount of work to make that happen. And what I'm noticing is it might not be as stable as you want to. Now, just pointing out also that FlexLayoutModule works well in Chrome. It's not working that well in IE, and there's other browsers there. So I would just this is just an introduction tutorial to tell you what it is. I'm very excited about this because trying to avoid using styles and using directives is really the way to go with laying out your flex items in your container. So it's intriguing to me, and I want to make sure it works in the browsers, and I want to make sure that I use it in my applications. Okay, so just an overview of the static API for the DOM containers. It applies the Flexbox CSS styles to the DOM container elements. And the containers are going to have one or more nested children. So you have this layout, right? The flow layout. It could be row. It defines the order of it defines the flow order of the items within the Flexbox. So you could define it to be row, and then for mobile devices, it could be column. And I showed you an example of what that might look like. And then you could have a flex layout wrap, which defines if child items appear on a single line or on multiple lines. So it defines whether they wrap. And then you have this FX layout gap, which defines if child elements within a Flexbox container should have a gap. And so you could define that to be a certain number of pixels. And you have an FX layout align, which defines how Flexbox items are aligned according to both the main axis and the cross axis within the Flexbox container. So you could have like a FX layout align, start, stretch, and so these are things that take time to experiment with. I'm also noticing that resizing the browser, sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does work, but that could be related to my implementation. It could be related to the overriding of my styles. It could be related to my code. It could be related to my browser version. So you'll see that shortly. Okay, and then the child elements within the container. There's an API set that applies the Flexbot CSS styles for a DOM element nested within the DOM container. We've seen this, and I went through some examples of this. Okay, so you could specify the resizing of its host element within the Flexbox container just by saying fx flex equals to how you want it to display. And then you could have the order. You could define the order to be the second element in the second Flexbox item. You could have an offset of a Flexbox item in a parent container flow layout. And like I said, you try this in the first element. This appears to work. In the second element, it doesn't appear to work, and then you resize the browser, and all of a sudden it works. So there's a lot of things here. Also, I guess I should point out that Webpack is also involved in this. So as you make these changes, Webpack might recompile, and then it might not be doing it the way it should. You might have to restart Webpack, the ng server, to make sure it possibly works. But my suggestion is do your research, do your unit testing, then you build with production on and make sure it works. Okay, so then you have the align. You could align in the center, etc., and you could maximize the width and height of an element in the layout container by doing an FX flex fill. Okay, this is the summary of really the API. You've got your these things you widely use, these things you're trying to hide and show. This works for responsive and non-flexbox elements. So the bottom line is with FlexLayout, you could pretty much use these directives. So you could hide and show, and then you could apply classes for a certain size device, let's say, and styles as well. So the bottom line is what you're doing with some of these things here is you're basically saying, oh, on an iPad Pro, I want to hide this. On a mobile device, I want to show this. For a large device, I want the class to be I want the style to use this particular class, and on a mobile device, I might want to use a different class, whatever. So you have the capability of controlling your responsive styles and stuff, and your media queries more accurately. Okay, so let's take a look at this code example, and we'll take a look, just briefly go over the code and take a look at it. So let's see what first let's take a look at the application code. So we went in and I generated a Flex layout project within WebStorm, and my WebStorm, I have my Angular 5 up installed, and WebStorm is pointing to the proper TypeScript and the proper Angular version. So when I do an Angular CLI generate a project Flex layout, it did generate the appropriate version of software, which I showed you that in the slide. So the scaffolding happened, and then what I did was I installed the Flexlayout module. So I won't bore you with too much details here. Let's just go look at the app module. And this is a little bit loaded, and I apologize, but I did try all the features in the layout module, but I won't bother you with too many. The whole thing here you have to realize, here, let me put this in presentation mode. Okay, so the app module I was trying to show you, this Flex Layout module has to be imported from the Angular Flex Layout. And then I have to declare it in my import statement in my app module. Now, I had a root component, I did some stuff there, but then I created these 3 components that this one focused on static HTML directives API, the static API for using the directives. This one focused on the media queries, and this one focused on the breakpoints. We're going to just talk about one of them now because I'm using this code for the course, and I go through all the detail, and it's very time consuming, so you don't want to look at that. Okay, so basically what I do is I have an app component, and I have a template, and I have a style sheet. And originally I started, I basically looked at the example online that comes with the documentation. I looked at the built-in styles and the example, and I stripped it down, and I'm trying to make it a little bit simple. So this stuff is still there because I do have a component which might might display and use some of these styles. But I define a title, and I define these function is mobile, false, invisible on desktop, return true, and then if I go into my template, I basically just show welcome to the title, and then what I do is I use this app flex1 component. So I've isolated my component, and so what my root component's doing is just displaying my flex1 component. So we could look at that. Okay, so this is really the component that's going to get rendered. I try to keep it as simple as possible. This is the selector that's being displayed in the root component template. So this is a child of the root component. And what I do is I define these functions. And I might use this in the layout. So if it's mobile, it returns false. So I don't show it in column format. I always show it in row format. But I might override that with something else. So I don't know. I forgot how I use that. But and then this is invisible on desktop, which returns true for a certain size, a certain pixel size within the browser. So when I maximize the browser, invisible on desktop returns true, and then I might hide an element if it's true. So let's see what the template's doing. Okay, so I do have a template here which is rather simple, and like I said, I really tried to keep it simple because it is simple. First of all, it is simple, and secondly, I want to keep the demo as short as possible. So what I do here is I have a container, and I have styles on the container. What you'll find is it's a flex container. I define it to be flex. So that's the important thing, that this container is flex. And then what I do is I also in my style sheet say the layout is row. And when it's mobile, I override it with a layout of column. And then I might take these three items, which are flex items. These div tags here are flex items. And what I do is I say, let's offset the first item. Let's make this order 3 of the second item. And let's hide this upon desktop. So we'll see some behavior there that when I maximize the browser, maybe this one might be hidden. So that's really all I really wanted to show you. I could show you the styles here just to show you that the div container is flex. And this is important. This outer container I just used to do some padding and color it just to give you a little visual effect. And then the divs within the container are also flex. And I put a flex direction on that being row, etc. Okay, so let's look at the application running. Okay, so it looks like I do have something here which corresponds to my application. So I did run the ng server and my browser's running, and this is being rendered. Now what I wanted to show you, of course, is as you increase the browser, I get to the large size of the device, and my invisible on desktop returns true, and so I wound up hiding an item. And then if I make things smaller, notice things are resizing, but then it turns to mobile. I did offset the first item. So let's go and try to change some of these things real quick. Let's remove the offset. It's cramping my style. Okay, so notice there is an issue here with the styles that are being overridden, and let's see what happens if I keep. Yeah, and I recall removing that but putting it back because I wanted to make sure that my style sheet's working for the other components, because I'm using the same one as I copy and paste. But that's besides the point. The whole point is that you have the ability to change the way things look. So notice here also I switched. Okay, notice also that in this particular view size, I also switched item 2 and I made it the third item. So what you'll see is if you remove that feature will go away as well. So this is the way they were originally ordered: item 1, item 2, and item 3. And notice this layout. This layout for small sizes was column. Let me see what happens when I change this to large. Okay, so in this case here also, that the third item got invisible, let's say. It got hidden, but it did display this. Now let's go and see if what it is that's causing this problem. Yeah. Okay. So that basically was causing the problem, but it's hard to tell whether it's really a style or it's really the fact that I need to restart the server to get it working properly. So that's why I typically go back to the code, and I'm not going to worry about that right now. So that's really all we wanted to show for this particular demo